The blue cloth was folded the same way every morning. Not almost the same way. The exact same way. Eleanor Washington had been folding it like this for 23 years since the morning she developed the system and decided it was correct and committed to it without reservation. Precise corners, 3 layers inward, each fold pressed flat with the edge of her palm before the next layer went down. The instruments nested inside in the sequence she had established and had never once deviated from needle driver at center. 2 retractors flanking it with handles facing right. The curved scissors at the bottom, left, angled at the precise position her hand would need them when Dr. Chen reached his palm toward her without looking down. She had learned early in her career that the surgeon's reach told you everything. A clean reach, the hand extended, and immediately finding what it expected meant the room was working correctly. A searching reach. The hand moving slightly, adjusting, hunting for the weight and angle meant something had slipped. Eleanor Washington's room did not produce searching reaches. In 27 years of working alongside Dr. Nathan Chen, she could count on one hand the number of times his reach had come up searching. She stood at her kitchen counter at 6:47 in the morning. October 5th. The tile was cold through her compression socks, the same style she had bought in the same 4-pack from the same medical supply company for the past 8 years, because when something worked, there was no reason to deviate from it. Behind her, the coffee maker was running its cycle, and the smell of it moved through the kitchen the way familiar things move through familiar spaces, present, unremarkable, essential. She had lived in this kitchen for 21 years. She knew its rhythms the way she knew her own, the coffee maker finishing at the same moment every morning. The particular quality of the morning light through the kitchen window in October versus the winter quality that would arrive in 6 weeks, the sound of the street outside coming through, slightly differently depending on whether the temperature had passed 40 degrees overnight. It was 41 degrees this morning. She had checked the forecast the night before the way she checked anything that might affect her morning transit. She finished folding the blue cloth and held it in both hands. 8 ounces of cotton, 14 ounces of steel. Slightly heavier than its size suggested it should be. She had always taken this weight as a reminder. The things inside it were serious, and the work they were going to do was serious, and the morning that preceded the work deserved the same quality of attention. She placed the kit in the left pocket of her teal scrub jacket, took the badge from its hook beside the door, and put the lanyard around her neck in the single smooth motion of someone who has performed the same action 8,000 times. She picked up her keys. She was out of the kitchen at 6:52. Eleanor Washington was 61 years old. Broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, 5 feet 10 inches in her compression socks with silver locks pulled back tight under the flat compression band she wore before scrubbing in. Her hands were the particular kind of careful that decades of operating room work produces, not delicate, not tentative, but controlled every movement, deliberate, every touch measured against a calculation that only she could see in its complete form. Her face was lined at the corners of the eyes and at the corners of the mouth and at the place between her brows where 35 years of difficult situations had left their specific accurate record. She wore these marks the way certain materials wear the marks of long and serious use, not as damage, but as evidence of what the material had been asked to do and had done without failing. She had walked through the doors of Mercy General Hospital for the first time on the 7th of March 35 years ago. She had been 26 years old. She had carried her certification papers in a manila folder she had been careful not to wrinkle because she was careful with things that represented something she had worked for. The OR supervisor that morning, a woman named Constance, 60 years old, with the appraising eyes of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by very little of it, had assigned Eleanor to OR Suite 1 to assist a third-year surgical resident named Dr. Hammond. Dr. Hammond dropped his forceps twice. He talked at a volume that was louder than necessary, the way certain residents talk when they are uncertain, as if volume can substitute for confidence in a room where the walls absorb both with equal indifference. Eleanor had said nothing unnecessary. She had passed every instrument in the correct orientation at the correct moment. She had anticipated 2 instrument requests before they were made, which was not something she had been trained to do in her clinical rotation, but something she had developed in the weeks before her first shift, studying the standard sequences of procedures she expected to assist in running them at home with a borrowed instrument tray until the sequences lived in her hands rather than her head. After the cholecystectomy, Dr. Hammond had looked at her. The look had a specific quality, the quality of someone who has encountered something they did not expect and is not yet certain what category to place it in. Eleanor had seen that look several thousand times since. She had become, in those 35 years, the person surgeons requested by name, not as courtesy, as requirement. When she was unavailable, certain surgeons rescheduled non-urgent procedures. When she was in the room operated at a different level of precision that every person in it recognized, and no one could fully explain, except that it had to do with the instrument timing and the instrument orientation and the specific quality of attention she brought to the space. Not passive waiting, but active. Reading, constant reading of the room, and the procedure, and the surgeon, and the patient, all 4 at once, always simultaneously, never letting any one of the 4 fall below the threshold of active attention. Dr. Nathan Chen had told his residents the instrument that has been present at the most successful outcomes in my operating room is not a scalpel or a retractor or a bypass machine. It is Eleanor Washington's instrument kit, which means it is Eleanor Washington. When she tells you to stop, stop. I have never regretted listening to her. I have only regretted the times I did not. 12,043 procedures over 35 years. She remembered the 10,000th. She had not tracked the count herself. It was Dr. Chen who told her on a Wednesday morning 4 years ago that the case they were about to begin would be number 10,000 by his count. He said it quietly at the scrub sink before they went in, and she had said nothing because there was nothing to say about a number that large except to begin the 10,001st, which they did. An 8-hour aortic repair that had gone into complications in the 4th hour and come through clean on the other side because the team was what it was, and the instruments were where they needed to be. She had driven home that Wednesday evening thinking about the 10,000 procedures and what they had added up to, which was not, she had concluded, a sum, but a practice that renewed itself every morning when she folded the blue cloth. She had also, somewhere in those 35 years, become a person that patients remembered. Not because she sought to be remembered. She did not introduce herself to patients in pre-op, that was not her role, but because patients who recovered and returned for follow-up visits sometimes asked for her by name. Twice, someone had left flowers at the nursing station. Once a woman had come back to the hospital a year after a valve replacement to bring cookies for the OR team. She had asked specifically to leave a note for Eleanor Washington. The note said, "You didn't know me when I was on the table, but I knew someone like you was there. I could feel it." Eleanor had kept that note in her desk for 7 years before throwing it away, which was, she suspected, 7 years longer than she should have kept it. She drove to the Clement Avenue parking structure and arrived at 7:33, 2 minutes ahead of her personal schedule. Level 2, the spot she had used for 11 years, not officially assigned to her, but understood by the OR staff to be hers in the way that certain things are understood without being written down. She walked to the elevator, pressed the street-level button, and rode down in the stainless steel box that smelled slightly of concrete and machine oil. October 5th. The morning air was cool and dry, 41 degrees, with the particular sharpness that early October produces in this city, edges more distinct sounds traveling slightly farther, the quality of distance somehow more honest than summer allows. She stepped out of the elevator and turned right toward the hospital entrance 200 yards ahead. She was thinking about Michael Torres as she walked. She had read his chart the previous evening, sitting at her kitchen table at 9:30 with her reading glasses on. 34 years old. Married, 2 children, 7 and 4. He had been admitted 2 weeks ago with an acute presentation that was managed to stable had returned twice since for monitoring. The most recent imaging had flagged a secondary compromise to the left ventricular function that moved the procedure into a more complex category than the initial presentation had suggested. She had made notes in her shorthand, 8 lines of compressed notation that translated to a full clinical picture for anyone who could read her system, which at Mercy General meant Dr. Chen and Gloria Reyes and no one else. She had reviewed the notes before bed. She had reviewed them again at 5:50, lying in the dark before the alarm, running the instrument sequence in her mind for the 4th time since she had seen the chart. She thought about his 2 children as she walked. The charge nurse on the pediatric floor had described the 7-year-old to Eleanor during Michael Torres's first admission, a girl who colored in activity books while waiting for her father's assessments, who asked questions about what was happening in complete sentences, who thanked the nurse for the apple juice without being prompted. Eleanor had not met her. She had only read the chart and thought about the children the way she thought about all the people who waited on the other side of the OR door, as the reason the instruments needed to be right and the sequence needed to be correct and the timing needed to be exact, because the people on the other side of the door were not abstract beneficiaries of technical competence. They were specific. They were real. They had apple juice and activity books and 7-year-old daughters who asked questions in complete sentences. She saw the patrol car parked at the corner of Clement and 5th when she was about 60 yards out. Engine running, pulled half up on the concrete apron at the edge of the hospital property. She registered it and filed it and kept walking. Officer Nathan Burke was 32 years old. He had been on the 7th District Force for 6 years. In those 6 years, he had filed 412 incident reports and received 4 formal complaints. Every one of the 4 complaints involved a person of color. Every one of the 4 was closed without action. 3 dismissed for insufficient evidence, 1 found unfounded after an 11-day departmental review. His supervisor had written a notation in his internal file 18 months ago in the particular language that supervisors use when they want to note a problem without creating a record that would require them to act on it. Burke's instincts sometimes outpace his patience. The notation was in a file that required a formal cause code to access. No cause code had ever been entered. No one had ever opened the file. Burke had been parked at this corner for 27 minutes. His shift had been quiet, the kind of quiet that certain officers experience as a condition requiring correction rather than an absence to be accepted. He had been watching the parking structure entrance with no particular plan, just watching the way he watched anything that was in front of him when nothing more specific was demanding his attention. He saw Eleanor Washington step off the elevator and turn right. He saw the teal scrubs, the badge lanyard, the blue cloth bundle in her left hand. A black woman walking with the measured purpose of someone who had somewhere to be and had always had somewhere to be. Something moved in the particular arithmetic that governed his perceptions of the world, and the result it produced had nothing to do with professional judgment, and nothing to do with the constitutional requirements for a stop, and nothing to do with any of the criteria the 7th District Police Academy had ever written into its training materials as lawful grounds for engagement. He put the car in drive. He rolled up alongside her and lowered the window. "Hey, stop right there." Eleanor stopped. She turned her head. She had been stopped before, not often, but enough times that the texture of this kind of stopping was recognizable, a particular cold quality that had nothing to do with the October air, the quality of something being done to you before anything has been established about you. She processed it with the professional speed of someone who had been processing difficult information in pressured environments for 35 years. She noted the situation. She began her inventory. She turned to face him fully, both hands at her sides, both open, the badge clearly visible on its lanyard at her chest. She said, "Good morning." Burke leaned out the window slightly. His eyes moved across her, the scrubs, the badge lanyard, the blue bundle, and the scanning pattern of someone building a file. "What are you carrying?" "Eleanor, my surgical instrument kit. I am a nurse at Mercy General Hospital. I have a surgical procedure beginning in 42 minutes. Is there something I can help you with?" The composure in her voice registered on his face as something that irritated him specifically. Composure in his operational experience of stops he had decided to make meant someone who thought they were above the situation, and he had spent 6 years establishing who was above what and who was not. "Burke, a nurse. Let me see some ID." Eleanor indicated the lanyard. The badge was at her chest, clearly visible from 6 feet in the October morning light. Photograph, name, department, hospital seal, Mercy General Hospital in blue print across the top. "Eleanor, right here, officer." Eleanor Washington, lead or nurse, Mercy General. The hospital's direct security line is on the back of this badge. 1 phone call under 2 minutes, and you can verify my identity, my department, and my start time. I am asking you to make that call. Burke looked at the badge. He looked at it for 3 full seconds in the way a person looks at something they have already decided not to accept as sufficient, spending the time not in assessment, but in the performance of assessment. Burke. That could be anyone's badge. The sentence fell between them and stayed there. Eleanor stood in the cool October air and let it stay there. She had learned across many years and many difficult rooms that responding to a closed door with force does not open the door. It adds to the noise in the room, and the noise always made the difficult things more difficult. She said, "The photograph on the badge matches my face. My name is printed below the photograph. I am standing here in OR staff scrubs with a hospital ID visible at my chest. I am offering you the direct verification number. There is a 34-year-old man waiting for cardiac surgery at 8:15. He has 2 children in this building right now. Please make the call." Burke, I decide the verification method. What is in the bundle? His voice had taken on a flat-edged quality, not loud but closed, and finished the voice of someone who has locked their reading of a situation and is now proceeding through the steps that follow from it, regardless of what the incoming information is saying. "Eleanor, these are 14 surgical instruments. They are sterile. I wrapped them at my home at 6:47 this morning using standard sterile transport protocol. If you need to verify the contents, the correct procedure is to contact hospital security, who can confirm the kit's contents without breaking the sterile field. Opening this wrap on a public sidewalk will contaminate the instruments inside. They would then require full re-sterilization before use. Re-sterilization takes 40 minutes minimum. The surgery starts in 41 minutes. I am asking you to follow the correct procedure for a sterile medical item." Burke, open it. 2 words, no space inside them. Eleanor looked at him steadily and ran the calculation she had been running in parallel to the conversation since the moment the patrol car rolled alongside her. If the kit was opened, the instruments were contaminated. Contaminated instruments required re-sterilization, 40 minutes minimum. The surgery was at 8:15. It was 7:52. She had 23 minutes. The suite at Mercy General had adequate instruments. She had used the suite instruments before. The needle driver from the suite tray had a grip 3 centimeters longer than hers. she would adjust her hold by 3 millimeters. The retractors were standard gauge comparable. The scissors had a curve angle 7 degrees flatter. She would rotate the transfer angle in the pass, so Chen received them correctly. She had run 411 valve replacements. She could perform this procedure with the suite instruments. It would not be optimal. It would be adequate. Adequate was enough to get Michael Torres through. She said, "Officer, I cannot open this instrument kit without contaminating the surgical instruments inside. These instruments are going inside a patient's chest cavity in less than 24 minutes. If they are contaminated here on this sidewalk, the surgery must be delayed while they are re-sterilized. That delay increases the patient's risk. A 34-year-old father of 2 children is waiting for this surgery. His stability window is specific and narrow. I am asking you one final time to call the hospital. The number is on the back of this badge. I will stand here and wait while you make the call." Burke pushed his car door open. The door swung out slowly and heavily. He stepped out and came around the front of the car with the forward-leaning posture of someone who has decided that physical proximity is itself an argument that closing the distance establishes something. He stopped 5 feet from Eleanor. His right hand went to his belt, not to his weapon, but to the belt in the gesture that is specifically designed to remind the other person of what the belt contains and what the person wearing it is authorized to do with what the belt contains. Eleanor did not step back. She kept her hands at her sides, both open, both visible. She kept her eyes on his face because looking away was a choice, and she had not made that choice. On the opposite sidewalk, a man walking a terrier had stopped completely. He was watching. At the corner of Clement and Fifth, a woman in the left turn lane had watched the light change and not moved her car. She was watching through her windshield. She had her phone in her hand. She had been at that light for long enough that the car behind her had moved around her rather than honk. "Burke lady, I am not going to tell you again. Place the bundle on the hood of the vehicle. Do it now. Eleanor." "My name is Eleanor Washington. I have worked at Mercy General Hospital for 35 years. I am the lead surgical nurse for cardiac procedures. The patient scheduled for 8:15 is a 34-year-old man. His children are in this building right now, 7 years old and 4 years old. They're waiting for their father to come through a surgery that I have been preparing for since last evening. I need you to make one phone call. One call. The number is right here." She held the lanyard forward slightly so he could see the back of the badge. He reached past the badge. He reached for the blue cloth. "Eleanor, do not touch that kit. Those instruments are sterile." His hand closed around the cloth. He pulled. Eleanor held for 1 second. The deep, unreasoning reflex of someone who understood with her full body what was inside that cloth and what its exposure would cost, not just to the kit, not just to the instruments, but to the man on the table and the children in the lounge. 1 second of the reflex. And then she released, because fighting over the kit was the wrong instrument for this situation, and the calculation was already complete, and sweet instruments were enough. Burke resisting, hands behind your back. The handcuffs came off his belt in one practiced motion. Eleanor Washington, 61 years old, lead surgical nurse, 12,043, completed procedures, 35 years of daily service at Mercy General Hospital, placed her hands behind her back and felt the metal click into place around her wrists at 7:53 in the morning on the 5th of October. The blue cloth bundle lay on the hood of the patrol car. Open, the 14 instruments reflected the pale October light in small, cold angles. Every second of their exposure was a second that turned them from sterile to contaminated. All of it the folding at 6:47, the 3-layer wrap, the careful nesting undone in less than 90 seconds. The man with the terrier across the street had not moved. He was watching. The woman from the left turn lane had driven slowly forward through the intersection and pulled to the curb 40 feet beyond it. She was watching through her rearview mirror. Her phone was in her hand. She was recording. Burke got back into the driver's seat. He opened his incident report terminal on the dashboard screen. He began filling in the fields. Eleanor sat in the back seat of the patrol car. She understood immediately that the position was designed to be uncomfortable. She accepted the discomfort by assigning it its correct level of importance in the hierarchy of what required her attention right now, which placed it at the bottom. She looked through the side window at the blue cloth on the hood. The handle of the needle driver was visible exposed, catching the morning light at an angle. She looked at it for 2 seconds. Then she looked away and began running the instrument sequence for the valve replacement using the suite's standard instruments. She ran it completely. Every step. The needle driver with the longer grip, the adjusted hold, the 3mm compensation. The retractors, comparable, no significant adjustment needed. The scissors, 7 degrees flatter the rotated transfer angle. She mapped every instrument against its suite equivalent, identified every adjustment committed, every compensation to the same memory that held 12,043 procedures. When she was done, she ran it again to confirm. Then she filed it in the category of things that were ready and turned her attention to the other things in the category of things that were not yet decided. She could see the hospital from where she was sitting. Through the side window, past the hood of the patrol car, past the blue cloth bundle lying open on the metal, she could see the top of the blue lamp above the emergency entrance. She had walked toward that lamp 8,000 times. It had been there since the hospital's renovation 4 years ago. She had been on the renovation advisory committee as the lead OR nurse. She was asked to weigh in on the lighting specifications for the OR suites and the adjacent corridors. She had submitted a 2-page recommendation with specific lux requirements for the scrub sink area. The committee had implemented them. She had never mentioned this to anyone, not even Dr. Chen. It was simply something she had done because it needed to be done correctly. She looked at the blue lamp above the entrance and thought about the walk from here to there, which she had made 8,000 times, which today was going to take longer than it had ever taken before, and which she would complete regardless because the walk had a destination, and the destination had a patient, and the patient had 2 children who were waiting. She thought about the 4-year-old boy. She knew nothing about him specifically, only that he existed, and that he was 4 years old, and that he was almost certainly in this building right now with someone who was trying to be calm for him. 4 was old enough to understand that something important was happening, and that the importance of it required a certain kind of waiting, the particular seated still waiting that children do when they have been asked to be patient and are trying their best. She thought about what that waiting felt like from inside it. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. She ran the instrument sequence one more time. Burke was typing. She heard through the window fragments of his radio transmission. Obstruction of officer. Suspicious item near hospital entrance. Detainee in custody pending further processing. She listened to each word with the cataloging attention of someone who would need to recall them precisely. She noted the word suspicious against the badge he had looked at for 3 seconds. She noted obstruction against the 3 explanations she had offered, and the direct verification number she had provided twice without receiving a call. She noted what a jury would notice. She had worked with residents who documented this way. They described their decisions rather than the patient's presentation. They built their charts backward from their conclusions. They were the most dangerous people in an operating room, not because of malice, but because they had closed the feedback loop between observation and conclusion and could not reopen it regardless of what the data was telling them. She had flagged every one of them to the attending surgeons. She had been right every time about what their closed loops would eventually cost someone. She was right about this one too. Inside Mercy General Hospital, OR Suite 3 was running. The suite was lit at full surgical intensity, flat, shadowless, the kind of light that reveals everything. Dr. Priya Nair was at the head of the operating table reviewing Michael Torres's vitals on the monitor and confirming the anesthesia maintenance parameters with her resident. Nair was 43 years old and had worked cardiac anesthesia for 16 years. She was considered by the OR staff who worked with her regularly to be the safest person in the room when things went wrong, not because she was unaffected by emergencies, but because her response to emergency was to become more precise, not less, more quiet, not louder, more focused on the data, and less focused on the noise that emergencies produce around the data. She had maintained a patient through an 11-minute bypass machine malfunction last March. She had not raised her voice during those 11 minutes. Gerald, the perfusionist, was at his station. The bypass machine was running its preparation cycle. Its characteristic low mechanical hum occupied the bottom register of the room the way a bass note occupies the bottom of a chord present constant, the foundation against which everything else was measured. Sandra, the circulating nurse, was running the instrument count on the suite's standard tray, calling out each instrument quietly and checking it against the clipboard list in a measured rhythm. The surgical tech was laying drapes in the sequence that Dr. Chen preferred, which was slightly different from the standard sequence, and which Sandra had learned in her second week working with him and had never needed to be reminded of since. Michael Torres was on the table, sedated. His face had the specific quality of unconscious calm, the face released from the expression that waking puts on it, the muscles at rest, the features presenting only themselves without the usual overlay of intention or concern. He was 34 years old and had 2 children and had come to this hospital twice before for monitoring, and neither of those visits had prepared his wife or his children for what this third visit required of them. Dr. Nathan Chen was at the scrub sink outside OR Suite 3. He was 62 years old. Tall, lean gray at his temples with the hands of someone who had spent 30 years making careful decisions with them. He scrubbed with the same timed sequence he had used since his residency, not because the timing was enforced, but because variability was the enemy of sterility, and he had made that enemy his personal enemy in his first year of training and had maintained that position for 3 decades. He was thinking about the procedure about the secondary left ventricular compromise in the imaging report, about the approach modification he had been considering since he reviewed the chart the previous evening. He was also thinking about Eleanor, not with concern exactly, with the background monitoring that he maintained about the conditions of a procedure before entering the room for it. Eleanor had been at his left side for 27 years. He knew her instrument timing the way musicians know each other's rhythms, not consciously, not as a fact he was aware of in the moment, but as a physical expectation that had been built from years of shared work and was now structural part of the architecture of how he moved in an operating room. When he reached his hand, expected a specific weight and orientation. Eleanor provided it with a consistency so reliable that he had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the things that are always exactly as they should be. He had told his residents last spring, stop and listen when Eleanor Washington tells you to stop. I do not care what the instrument count says. I do not care what the timeline says. I do not care what anyone else in the room is saying. Stop and find out what she knows. I have never regretted listening to her. I have only ever regretted the times I did not. He turned off the water. He held his hands in the sterile posture, fingers above elbows. He turned toward the OR suite entrance and looked through the glass panel. Nair at the head of the table, Gerald at the machine, Sandra at the tray, the circulating rhythm of the count, the surgical tech at the cart, Michael Torres on the table stable, the monitor showing a rhythm that was adequate and controlled. Eleanor was not in the room. Chen said to no one in particular. Where is Eleanor? Sandra looked up from the tray. She said, She hasn't come in yet. Chen looked at the clock on the suite wall. The clock said 8:03. He said, Get me the charge nurse, right now. Gloria Reyes was the morning OR charge nurse, 44 years old, trained in emergency medicine before moving to OR management, and possessed of the specific skill that emergency medicine develops in people who survive it, the ability when multiple problems are developing simultaneously to identify immediately which one will kill you first. She called Eleanor's cell at 8:03 and 14 seconds. 4 rings. Voicemail. She called the parking structure security booth. No answer. She called the main security desk. The main desk had the footage. The security officer there had been watching his monitors when it happened. Eleanor stopped on the sidewalk at 7:49, the patrol car pulling alongside the interaction, the bundle taking the handcuffs. He had clipped the footage. He had been sitting with it, uncertain of the escalation path, when Gloria called and resolved that uncertainty immediately. Gloria watched the clip. 4 seconds. She watched for 4 seconds, and then she stood up and walked to OR Suite 3 without breaking stride. She knocked on the glass panel. Dr. Chen came to the door. He looked at Gloria's face, and something in his expression shifted not dramatically, but with the specific, visible quality of a mind receiving significant information and immediately beginning to process its implications. He said, "Tell me." Gloria Eleanor has been detained outside. Camera footage from the Clement Avenue entrance. A patrol officer arrested her. 7:49. She held up her phone. Chen looked at the screenshot for 3 seconds. Eleanor in handcuffs. The blue cloth bundle on the hood of the patrol car. The badge lanyard clearly visible on her chest. He looked at all of it for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds he ran through the implications. The way he ran through the implications of unexpected findings in a procedure methodically without panic, with the specific priority ranking of someone whose job was always to identify the most important thing and act on it. He walked back into the suite and went directly to Dr. Nair. He said his current stability window. Nair looked at the monitors. She said, 30 minutes comfortable. I can push to 45 with additional management, but at 45 I start accumulating anesthesia variables that I do not want at the start of a 4-hour procedure. The risk profile changes at 45 minutes. It changes significantly after 60. Chen said, "I understand." He walked out of the suite. He removed his sterile gown and handed it to Sandra without looking at her. He walked to the nursing station's landline and dialed Richard Holt's direct extension. Richard Holt answered on the second ring. He was 57 years old, a former litigator who had run operations at Mercy General for 11 years, and those 11 years had given him the ability to receive difficult information and immediately identify the most important fact in it. He had been a litigator before that, and the litigator's instinct find the real stakes and do not be distracted by procedural noise had never left him. Chen said with the quietness that only develops in people who have spent decades delivering critical information in rooms where quiet means control. Richard. Eleanor Washington has been detained outside the Clement Avenue entrance by a patrol officer. I have camera footage. I have an open patient in Suite 3 with a 30-minute stability window remaining. I am telling you now that I will not proceed with this surgery without Eleanor in that room. She is not a preference. She is not interchangeable with alternatives. She is required. This is your notification. The clock is running. Holt said, "Nathan, there are standard channels for situations." Chen, I understand the channels, Richard. This call is not about channels. This call is the outcome. Eleanor is in that room or the surgery does not proceed. How you solve this in the next 30 minutes is your area. I have told you what the outcome must be. He placed the receiver down. The nursing station had 4 people in it. None of them spoke. They looked at each other across the counter and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. They all understood what they had just heard, and they understood it within the context of 29 years of Dr. Nathan Chen at this hospital, 29 years during which he had operated through a regional power failure operated during a code red that was believed in its first 15 minutes to be an actual emergency, operated with a hairline fracture in his left ring finger because the patient was on the table and no backup was available within the window. He had never in 29 years said he would not operate. Richard Holt was on 3 communications within 60 seconds. He called the 7th District's Community Liaison Office. He texted the hospital's legal department. He pulled up the security footage that Gloria had sent to his computer terminal. He watched all 8 minutes and 41 seconds. He watched a woman in OR scrubs with a hospital badge on her lanyard indicate that badge twice. He watched her explain the contents of the bundle 3 separate times visibly and in clear detail. He watched her extend the badge toward the officer for direct inspection. He watched the officer take the blue cloth bundle instead. He watched the handcuffs go on. He had been a litigator for 14 years. He knew exactly what he was looking at, and he knew exactly what it was going to produce if it was properly documented, which it was already going to be because the camera had been running, and he had his legal department's cell number, and 11 years of knowing what to do with both. He called the 7th District Watch Commander directly. Captain Adrian Voss had 22 years on the force, 4 of them commanding the 7th District. She answered on the second ring. Holt said, "Captain Voss. Richard Holt at Mercy General. I am sending you a video file right now. Please watch it before we speak." He sent the clip. 17 seconds of silence. "Voss, I have it." Holt. The woman in that video is Eleanor Washington. She has been the lead OR nurse at this hospital for 35 years. Dr. Nathan Chen, our lead cardiac surgeon, his mortality rate is the lowest in the state, has informed me that the cardiac surgery currently in preparation with the patient already under anesthesia on the table does not proceed without Eleanor in that room. The patient has a 30-minute stability window remaining. I need Eleanor Washington through my front door in 20 minutes. I also want you to know that this footage and the full documentation of this incident are already with my legal department. The accounting for what happened in the last 20 minutes is already underway regardless of what happens in the next 20. Voss, I am pulling Officer Burke's transmissions right now. She pulled them. She listened to Burke's account. Suspicious item. Obstruction. Detainee in custody. She looked at the footage on her screen. The badge indicated twice the explanation given 3 times the verification number offered no phone call, made the grab the handcuffs. She listened to Burke's account and looked at the footage and understood the distance between them. 22 years had given Adrienne Voss a specific skill that was not taught in any academy and could not be acquired quickly, the ability to know immediately without reasoning through it step by step whether an officer's action was going to survive documentation. Burke's action had been documented by the Clement Avenue camera from the moment he lowered his window. It was not going to survive. Voss, Officer Burke is being recalled to the station. The detainee is being released immediately. Give me her name again. Holt. Her name is Eleanor Washington. She is not a detainee. She is the lead surgical nurse at this hospital. She has 35 years of service, and she has a patient on the table right now. 18 minutes. He put the phone down. On Clement Avenue, Nathan Burke's radio delivered the recall order. The message appeared on his terminal screen. He sat in the driver's seat and looked at the message. He looked through the rear window at Eleanor in the back seat. He looked at the blue cloth bundle on the hood of the car, open instruments, exposed to the October air, the sterility gone. He looked at all of it for several seconds. He got out. He walked to the back door and opened it. He worked the handcuff release. He said nothing. Eleanor stepped out. She brought her hands forward and looked at the faint pressure marks on her wrists. She looked at Burke with the specific quality of attention that exists past anger and past composure and past the categories that have simple names. The attention of someone who is witnessing something completely and storing it completely because it will need to be accurately recalled in a setting where accuracy matters. She said in the quiet voice she used when something needed to be said clearly and without the addition of any extra force, "You should understand what happened here. You opened a sterile surgical kit with ungloved hands on a public sidewalk. Those instruments were going inside a man's chest in 20 minutes. He has 2 children in that building right now, 7 years old and 4 years old. They are waiting for their father's surgery. What you did put that surgery at risk. You are going to have to carry that regardless of whatever else follows from this morning." Burke said nothing. Eleanor picked up the blue cloth bundle from the hood of the patrol car. She held it open and looked at each instrument, contaminated all 14, none of them usable in the time she had. Sweet instruments confirmed. She turned and walked. 172 yards. She covered them in 2 minutes and 9 seconds at the pace of someone doing precise work, not running, not deliberately slow, simply moving at the speed the work required. Danny was at the security booth when she came across the plaza. He had arrived 3 minutes late and was still settling in when he looked up and saw her coming with the blue cloth, partially open in her hands and that particular set to her jaw. He stood up and held the door without saying anything. She went through. She was at the scrub sink outside OR Suite 3 at 8:23. Dr. Chen was there, re-gowned, waiting. He turned when he heard her steps. 27 years of shared rooms passed between their eyes in the distance of the corridor, without a word, without needing a word. He said instrument status. She said kit is contaminated, using Sweet instruments. Sandra, I need a full primary tray count. All 14 positions starting with the needle driver. Call each one out. Sandra, starting now. Eleanor scrubbed. 60 seconds. Full protocol. Both hands, both forearms. She gowned. She gloved. She took her position on the left side of the operating table across from Chen and looked at the monitors. Michael Torres's vitals were stable. The window was still open. She looked up at Dr. Chen. He said ready. She said ready. The surgery began at 8:26. 4 hours and 19 minutes. The aortic valve replacement was completed without complication. The secondary left ventricular compromise that the imaging had flagged was addressed intraoperatively in the 3rd hour by a modification Dr. Chen made, quietly communicating it to Nair in 2 words, reaching his palm toward Eleanor. She placed the correct Sweet instrument in his hand at the correct angle, the adjustment she had mapped in the back of the patrol car, the rotated transfer angle, the compensation for the flatter curve. His hand found what it expected, a clean reach. Michael Torres's heart resumed its own rhythm at 12:28. The monitor showed a steady, strong cadence. Nair said, looking good. 2 words carrying 19 years of measured clinical weight. He was moved to recovery at 12:47. His wife was in the 2nd floor waiting room. His mother had the 2 children in the family lounge down the hall. The 7-year-old with 8 colored pages of her activity book. The 4-year-old asleep against his grandmother's arm with his head tilted at the angle children tilt when sleep finally takes them despite their best efforts to stay awake for whatever important thing might happen. The cardiologist walked into the waiting room at 1:19. The wife put her face in her hands and made a sound that had several things happening in it at once. Relief and exhaustion and love and the recognition that something which could have taken everything did not take anything. The 7-year-old girl beside her put her arm around her mother's waist without being asked or told. Just put it there the way children do when they have been paying close attention to the people they love. The 4-year-old boy slept through the cardiologist's announcement. He was still asleep against his grandmother's arm in the family lounge. When his grandmother heard the news and began to cry quietly, the boy stirred but did not wake. He settled back into the chair with his head against his grandmother's shoulder, and she held him there with one arm and covered her mouth with her other hand. And the family lounge was very quiet in the particular way that rooms become quiet when the worst thing that was going to happen did not happen. In OR Suite 3, the reset was underway. Sandra was counting instruments back to the cart. Gerald was running the post-procedure checklist on the bypass machine. The surgical tech was breaking down the drape setup. Dr. Nair was at the computer terminal completing the anesthesia record, a document that would 4 months later be entered into evidence at Nathan Burke's trial as Exhibit 7, specifically the section documenting the impact of the delayed surgical start time on the patient's accumulated anesthesia risk profile and the consequent modification to the procedural risk assessment. Dr. Chen was in his office writing. He was writing his statement for the hospital's legal department. He was writing it in the same precise clinical language he used to write procedure notes. No excess words, no editorial commentary. Only the sequence of events as they had occurred and the specific medical significance of each event in that sequence. He wrote it in 40 minutes. It was 4 pages. When he finished, he read it through once, made 2 corrections for factual precision, and sent it to Richard Holt's assistant. Then he went to the scrub sink to prepare for his 2 o'clock case. Richard Holt authorized the preservation of the Clement Avenue footage as a formal evidence file at 8:45 that morning before the surgery was completed. He called the security desk directly himself in the specific legal language that establishes chain of custody properly. The hospital's legal department submitted the formal complaint to the 7th District at 11:15. 51 pages. Full video footage with metadata confirming it was unaltered. Eleanor's certified employment record 35 years. A 4-page statement from Dr. Nathan Chen, precise and clinical. A 3-page statement from Dr. Priya Nair, including a section documenting the impact of the delayed start time on the patient's accumulated anesthesia risk profile and the consequent change in procedural risk. A statement from Gloria Reyes. A statement from the security officer who had flagged the footage. A 5-page letter from Richard Holt that the 7th District's Internal Affairs investigator would describe in his notes as the most thoroughly documented complaint he had reviewed in 18 years of investigations. The complaint opened a mandatory Internal Affairs investigation within 24 hours. The investigation pulled Burke's full complaint history. 4 complaints, each involving a person of color, each dismissed without action. None triggering the mandatory pattern review that departmental policy required after 3 similar complaints against the same officer. That review should have been initiated 18 months ago after the 3rd complaint. The cause code that would have opened the review process had never been entered. The administrative system had failed at the step before any supervisor needed to make a decision. The Internal Affairs investigator wrote in his summary report, "The failure to initiate the mandatory pattern review after the 3rd similar complaint directly enabled the conditions under which the October 5th incident occurred. The accountability for this failure extends beyond Officer Burke to the administrative processes of the department itself. Burke's badge was suspended within 72 hours of the complaint filing. The investigation ran 4 months. At its conclusion, the findings were delivered to the district attorney. The DA reviewed the footage, the complaint history, the pattern review failure, and Dr. Nair's statement documenting the increased procedural risk from the delayed start time. Charges were warranted on 3 counts. Burke was charged with unlawful detention, filing a false police report, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. His attorney argued lawful discretionary authority. He argued that an unusual bundle being carried near a hospital entrance constituted a reasonable basis for inquiry, and that the officer had acted within his authority to request an inspection. The jury watched 8 minutes and 41 seconds of a woman in a hospital badge explaining her identity 3 times, offering a direct verification number twice, and never receiving a phone call, and then being handcuffed on the sidewalk in front of the entrance to the hospital where she had worked for 35 years. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and 40 minutes. The 4-person stood, guilty on count 1, guilty on count 2, guilty on count 3. The courtroom went quiet in the way that courtrooms go quiet when something has been decided that will not be undecided. Burke sat at the defense table. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Burke did not respond. He was sentenced to 14 months and permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification. He would serve 8 months in the county facility and the remainder under supervised release. He would not work in law enforcement again. His attorney filed for appeal on the civil rights count. The circuit court denied the appeal 9 months after filing. The sentencing also produced a consequence that extended beyond Burke. The Internal Affairs reports finding that the failure to initiate the mandatory pattern review after Complaint 3 had directly enabled Complaint 5 required a response from the department. The 7th District implemented a new administrative system for tracking and flagging complaint patterns, a system that required no cause code to open and that activated automatically when a third similar complaint was filed against the same officer. It was implemented across all 10 districts in the city by the following spring. It was named in the documentation that accompanied the implementation as a corrective measure arising from the Mercy General incident. That documentation did not name Eleanor Washington specifically, but it did not need to. The woman who had been in the left turn lane on the morning of October 5th, who had watched through her windshield and then pulled to the curb and recorded with her phone, submitted her footage to the Internal Affairs investigation when she saw the hospital's complaint reported in the local news. The footage was 47 seconds captured from the curb on Clement Avenue, showing the full sequence from a slightly different angle than the hospital's exterior camera. It was entered into evidence as Exhibit 2. The jury watched it second. They watched the hospital's camera footage first, and then they watched the 47 seconds from the curb, and what they saw was the same sequence from 2 directions, which left no interpretive angle available to the defense that either camera had not covered. Michael Torres sent Eleanor a card 4 months after his discharge from Mercy General. He had heard about the arrest from his wife, who had seen the local news report after the Internal Affairs investigation was made public. The envelope was addressed to Eleanor Washington, lead surgical nurse, Mercy General Hospital, with the address confirmed by calling the hospital main line, because he did not have her direct address and did not feel he should try to obtain it. The card was simple. It said, "I heard what happened on the morning of my surgery. I don't know the right words. So I will just tell you that my daughter danced at my bedside last week and my son asked me to teach him to throw a baseball and my wife is sleeping again at night. I thought you should know what that morning was for. Thank you." Eleanor kept the card on her kitchen counter for 3 weeks. Then she moved it to the small shelf in the living room where she kept the things she wanted to keep permanently. Her grandmother's photograph, the laminated copy of her certification from 35 years ago, the gold pen her OR team had given her at her 25th anniversary, a small drawing her granddaughter had made that was theoretically a horse but looked more like an optimistic cloud. The card went on the shelf. It was still there when she left for her last shift. Eleanor Washington returned to Mercy General the morning after her arrest and worked a full shift. She returned the day after that and worked a full shift. She declined all 3 media interview requests in writing with the same single sentence each time: "I have patients who require my attention, and that is where my attention belongs." She answered the Internal Affairs investigators' questions in 2 sessions, the first lasting 40 minutes, the second lasting 22. Between the sessions, she had returned to the OR and completed a scheduled procedure. She had not canceled the procedure. She had not rescheduled it. She had not stopped to speak to the press in the hallway on her way in or out. She described the badge indication both times. She described the bundle explanation all 3 instances. She described the direct verification number she had offered. She described Burke's hand on the blue cloth. She described the handcuffs. She described the condition of the instruments when she retrieved the bundle from the hood of the patrol car. She described everything with the methodical precision of someone who has spent 35 years observing and recording accurately, because accurate observation was not a virtue she had chosen, It was the foundation of everything the work required. Then she went back to the OR. 8 months after the verdict, she retired on the date she had planned before any of this happened, the 35th anniversary of her first shift. She had told only her daughters the specific date because she did not make announcements about things she was simply going to do. Her last day in OR Suite 3 was a Tuesday in late March. The case was a routine valve repair, uncomplicated, successful. When it was over and the instruments were counted and the patient was in recovery, Dr. Chen pulled down his surgical mask and looked at her across the clean table under the flat OR light. He said 12,044. She said 44. He said, "I've counted every procedure since October 5th. Today was 44. I thought you should have the exact number." The suite was quiet, in the way it is quiet after a successful procedure. The settled quiet of a space that has been used for its correct purpose and is resting. Eleanor stood in that quiet and felt the weight of the number. It was not heavy. It was specific. And specific was its own kind of weight, which was the best kind. She said, "Don't make me cry in here, Nathan." He did not make her cry in there. He waited until they were in the corridor outside Suite 3, and then they stood in the hallway together without speaking, because the hallway outside an operating room after 35 years is not a place for speeches. It is a place for standing in briefly and feeling the full weight of what was built there, and then carrying that weight out the door, not as burden, but as the specific and permanent record of a person who did the work and kept doing the work, and let the work be exactly what it was. Danny held the door for her when she came through the main lobby for the last time. He said, "Good morning, Ms. Washington." It was still morning technically, and some forms of courtesy deserve to outlast every complication. She said, "Good morning, Danny." She walked out. She crossed the plaza at her usual pace. She passed the corner of Clement and 5th. She passed the concrete apron where the patrol car had been parked, the place on the sidewalk where the handcuffs had clicked into place, the 172 yards she had covered in 2 minutes and 9 seconds on the morning of October 5th. She walked through all of it without slowing, because these places were part of what had happened, and what had happened was finished exactly, permanently, irrevocably finished, and she was done standing in it. She got to her car. She put the blue cloth bundle on the passenger seat. She would not be bringing it into an operating room again. She was keeping it. She had made that decision weeks ago without ceremony, the way she made decisions about things that were simply and permanently true. She started the car. She had a granddaughter waiting at her daughter's house. 8 months old. The particular weight of 8 months old. The specific way 8 months old looks up at a face and finds it sufficient, which is the most uncomplicated form of trust available to a human being, and which Eleanor intended to be the next thing in her morning. She drove out of the parking structure onto Clement Avenue, turned right, passed the corner of Clement and 5th, and kept driving through the late March morning, the air carrying the particular quality of a city that has made its decision about spring, the light coming from a slightly different angle than October, softer and more patient, and drove toward what came next, which was hers, entirely, completely, and permanently hers. Some truths do not need argument. They need documentation and witness and the specific accounting that time provides to everything. The badge said what she was. The footage said what was done to her. The verdict said what 12 people given both decided was right. What came after belonged to Eleanor Washington alone. Her daughters, her granddaughter, her mornings without the alarm, and her evenings without the blue cloth needing to be folded and carried 200 yards across concrete before the day had finished deciding to begin. What came next was hers, and she had earned every moment of it, and she drove toward it through the morning without once looking back. If this story reached something in you, subscribe our channel. We tell the stories of the people who carried their dignity through every room that tried to take it from them and came out the other side with it intact.